John D. Rockefeller was one of the founders of the original Board of Education in America. And he's on record numerous times saying, we need a nation of doers, not thinkers, right? And so if you got to go back and realize that our formal education system is designed to make people employees and workers. And so, unfortunately, the answer to the question of where should I get a financial education has to almost sound like a bit of a conspiracy, but it's like you have to get away from the normal if you want to get things that aren't normal.
The Without Fear of Her Future podcast is for women who are passionately pursuing financial freedom through investing in real estate. We are here to empower you to be brave, dream big, and design a life you love. I'm your co-host, Tresa Todd, founder of the Women's Real Estate Investors Network and author of the book, Without Fear of Her Future.
And I'm Melissa Baker, real estate investor and fitness coach specializing in turning properties from drab to fab. I'm here to help motivate and inspire you to build your dream life because, girl, you deserve it.
What you must know about having a will. Please know that we are not attorneys or financial advisors. The information shared in this conversation is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered legal or financial advice. We encourage you to consult your financial advisor or attorney for direction tailored to your specific circumstances. Well, I am personally super excited about our guest today, Kelton Todd, who happens to be a co-owner of the Women's Real Estate Investors Network, a real estate investor, mentor, and public speaker. He is dedicated and on a mission to learn everything he can about real estate investing. Kelton inspires others to take action and change the direction of their lives through creating their own financial freedom. Well, like I said, Kelton happens to be pretty special to me. He is my youngest son, and he was my mentor. He and my other two sons are the ones that talked me into leaving a 25-year career in the medical field to move to Dallas, Texas, to start investing in real estate. He absolutely changed my life forever. And then 14 months later, somehow or another, I convinced him to help me start the Women's Real Estate Investors Network. He certainly did not know what he was stepping into when he said yes, and that we were going to become the largest women's real estate investors network in the nation, and it was going to be a full-time job for him. But boy, am I thankful, because together we have had the opportunity to change women's lives all over the nation. And I'm so excited to have you here with us today, Kelton.
Awesome. Super excited to be here. I was wondering how far you were going to get through that introduction without mentioning I was your son. So excited to talk to the ladies. And yeah, I mean, all I can do is second what you just said. It's definitely not what, definitely didn't know what I was signing up for, but the impact has been well worth it. And it's been an incredible journey, and fun to watch the impact that it's making.
Well, we're so glad to have you today. Thank you for your time.
Of course.
Absolutely. Well, today we're not specifically talking about our favorite subject, which is real estate investing. But I know that so many women have no idea how important it is to have a will or a trust, or even know the difference between the two. And so when we do pass away, because that's going to happen to all of us someday, it can be such a burden to our family if we do not have anything in place. So today is a little bit about shedding some education on why wills and trust are so vital. So Kelton, can you just speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I think the reality is most people don't know. And if you're listening right now and you find yourself as one of those people who aren't fully aware, maybe you know the difference between the two, but you don't really know exactly why you need one or how to get one or what all it's for, then the reality is you're normal, right? That's the norm. We're not taught these things in school. It's crazy, wondering like who sits around and thinks about what we're taught in school, because we learn all these crazy things, but then you get into the real world and it's like, man, I wish someone would have taught me about, finances and credit scores and trusts and wills and like all the things that actually are important once you get out of school. Most people just aren't familiar with them. They're not aware of them. And so I think the first thing to acknowledge is just that that's the norm. You're not wrong. You're not behind. You're not, different because you don't understand those things. You're the norm. That's the norm. However, what we like to encourage people is to be, a abnormal, against the norm, go against the grain, and become educated on the things that most people don't get educated on. And what's really cool about, we like to call it your financial education in general. But what's really cool about financial education is I believe it's the most impactful form of education that you'll get. Our whole life we're just taught like a formal education, right? Which is great. We learn how to read and write and all those things. But once you get, past maybe middle school, there's just not a whole lot that you start to learn that really changes your life and changes your way of life and what your day to day looks like. And when you start getting a true financial education, the impact of it is so great. And so when you talk about wills, a lot of times people throw wills and trust into the same category, and they're really wildly different, right? A will is something that anybody should have. You can get out a piece of paper at this very moment and write last will at the very top of it, and you could start writing down everything that you want to leave to who, and sign and date it, and that's technically a will. Like, everybody should have a will, and that's as simple as that. Obviously, if you want to formalize it a little bit more, I encourage you to get it notarized. Right now you have really more than what majority of Americans have, and that's a will in place that kind of it's just a narrative to tell whoever is going to be the over your estate whenever you pass away, or over your belongings when you pass away, what to do with them. And so a will is important. It's easy to do. You can go online and get them for cheap. You can literally handwrite one yourself. There's no reason that everybody doesn't have one, and you would be shocked how much easier it is when somebody passes away if there's a simple will in place. And I literally mean a piece of paper that says last will on it and just outlines what you want to do with certain things. And a lot of people try to overcomplicate it, right? If you have 3 kids and you want to write on there that I leave my house to my 3 kids, that's it, right? Like, if you take it to an attorney, they're going to add 1,000 words. Thine each child shall get 1/3 equal equivalent parts of the estate but at the end of the day, it's just going to say each of my kids get the house, right? And so there are certain things like that with houses that would kind of happen anyways. The system's kind of designed for that, but it's got to go through probate, which is very lengthy, very time consuming, very stressful, and really just burdensome for people that are supposed to be mourning at that time, and usually are mourning at that time. But instead of mourning and dealing with the loss, they end up having to deal with finances. And I think the worst time in anybody's life that they should be dealing with finances is whenever they're trying to mourn the loss of somebody. And you want to give them that opportunity to be able to really focus on what is probably more important to them at that time, and that's coping with what's going on. And so a simple will can go a really long ways. Having said that, and I want to lead with that because I think a lot of people really do overcomplicate it. They get analysis paralysis and they do nothing. And so if everybody listening does nothing more than go and does that, that is a great start. Having said that, that is 10 times better than what most people have. But compared to what you could have, I would say that's a level 1 out of 10, right? That's just where it starts. That's where it really begins. Whenever you start to go into this world of trusts, it gets so much more complex, but it also, with complexity comes benefits, right? You're able to structure trusts in a way that are a lot more complex than just, I want to leave my house to my 3 kids, right? You can start getting really creative about, but when do you actually want them to have the decision-making rights to do something with that house? If they're 12 years old and you leave a house to a 12-year-old, you're not doing anybody any good, right? So you can have executors of the trust or the estate, depending on what all you're setting up, that will actually manage that property or make those type of financial decisions until the child gets old enough, which you get to determine what is old enough, right? To an age to where they can actually make some of those decisions. And so even that's a very basic example, but even if you have older children, it's the exact same concept. It just gives you a lot more power and authority to be able to actually determine how these things are going to be left, where they're going to be left. But then it also gets really fun because you can start doing a lot more creative things when it comes to estate taxes and how much of what you're leaving behind is actually going to get taxed, how it's going to get taxed, when it gets taxed, and that those implications. It might take you some time on the front end and maybe cost you a few $1,000s, give or take, on the front end could end up saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes alone, not to mention legal fees, attorney fees, real estate fees. I mean, it's crazy. If you do own real estate and all you do is leave it behind, and you have one of the people leaving it behind just wants some money, everybody else is forced to sell it all. You might have worked your whole life to create some really good real estate, and now it's all just going to get unwound and sold, versus actually being able to clarify who gets what and how, what the terms and everything looks like. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think that's the simplest of it.
Wow, that was a lot.
That was a lot.
Absolutely.
That was a lot. But it's good because I think it's so important for the women to know. I love that you went through, like, you can write the will down on a piece of paper, because you're right. Most Americans don't even have that much. And this has come to our attention because I didn't have one until recently. I didn't have anything in place. And I look back, as a single mom and think, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that nothing happened to me in those years that my children were minors, and I had no instructions written anywhere for them. So I think it's so important to bring this to light. The key differences in a will and a trust, you kind of went over a little bit, but how does somebody know, like, everybody needs a will, but if I need more, how do they know if they need a trust?
Yeah, so I think it's for me, it's difficult to pull like just one item out and say, when do I need this one specific item, right? I think I kind of look at it overall as a whole. I think if you when you start owning assets, which mean you probably have entities in place, or LLCs, or stuff like that. Obviously, it becomes very, very prevalent that you would need a more dynamic estate plan, if you will. A trust, particularly, is really good whenever you have assets. If you're going to start buying a real estate, if you've got any type of assets, if you've got life insurance that holds a death benefit, whether that's term life or whole life, to me, I guess that's how I would define it. Is I would make the decision that I probably need a trust in place once I have some form of assets in place. But a lot of people listening may already have those, and then a lot of people listening may be going, "Well, I don't even have those right now," right? And so the reality is that's not your starting point. Your starting point is getting a financial education. Once you get a financial education, that will lead you down the path of needing that first entity set up, and then needing that trust set up, and kind of going through that journey. Now, some people also know that I've reached a point in my life where I'm going to start buying assets. Obviously, that's the sooner you do it, the better when it comes to that. So instead of, you can always go back and do it later, but there are some advantages to doing it right out the gate. So maybe you don't own a lot of assets right now, but you say, hey, I'm at a point in time in my life where I am going to start making some investments. Maybe I saved up some 401k or have some money in my IRA, but now I want to actually start taking some things and investing for myself and actually creating some assets. I would say that's an ideal time as well.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of repeat back, and you tell me, when you're talking about assets, you're talking really about assets outside of your homestead, because you really probably still, if it's just your home and your vehicles, you could probably just get away with a will. But when you start owning assets outside your own homestead, is that when you would say it's time to start really looking at getting the trust?
Yeah, I think so. Exactly. I maybe throw an IRA or a 401k in there, right? I think that's about the max I would ever want without a trust in place, is maybe a house, a car, and a 401k. I think that is what a lot of the average Americans have, and they could get by with it. They could get by with the will, or at least it would be a lot better. What I would like to see those people do instead is go out there and invest in a financial education. Go out there and start really getting the education necessary, and that is what's going to lead you down the road of having the opportunity to needing a trust and a true estate plan and everything else.
Well, Kelton, you've mentioned financial education several times. And I think that most people listening are like, well, where do I even start with getting a financial education? Is there a college course? Where does a typical American get a true financial education these days?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I will say it's very difficult to get in a very traditional format. So there's not a formal education you're going to get for it. The reality is, you've heard me say this oftentimes, Mom, and share with people. John D. Rockefeller was one of the founders of the original Board of Education in America, and he's on record numerous times saying we need a nation of doers, not thinkers, right? And so if you got to go back and realize that our formal education system is designed to make people employees and workers. And so unfortunately, the answer to the question of where should I get a financial education has to almost sound like a bit of a conspiracy, but it's like you have to get away from the normal if you want to get things that aren't normal, right? And so the reality is Americans aren't given a financial education because all the way back to the founders of the education system didn't want you to have a financial education. They wanted you to have an education just enough to go get a job, contribute to the economy, help grow the economy, and pay taxes. And so in order to get a financial education, you've got to start looking elsewhere. And so the place that I found that was mentors. I think most people that learn and get a financial education end up having to go get a mentor. And a mentor can be anybody out there that has a financial education. And the qualification to find out if somebody has a financial education would start with what type of finances do they have? I think one of the best pieces of advice that we give to people often is don't take advice from people who don't have what you want. And the reality is most of us take financial advice from our parents, but I think most people want more financial freedom than our parents had. And so that's really where it starts. It's like, okay, well, the education system didn't get me the financial education that I want. The taking advice from people that don't have what I'm trying to get isn't going to get me what I want. So I've got to start looking elsewhere. I've got to find out where are some mentors out there, some people that have already created financial success. And again, mentors can be in all different ways, right? Some people are fortunate enough to have that rich uncle that they can reach out to and say, hey, you do things differently than my family. What do you do? And how do I learn from you to start doing what it is that you do? But the reality is most of us don't have that either. And so we've got to go start reaching further than maybe just friends and family. And that's where, that's where I met my first mentor, was going to a local networking event, a local meetup. And, they were hosting an event and started sharing all this financial education. And it's crazy because most people hear it and they run. They start hearing like, oh, this sounds like a scam or a get rich quick thing or too good to be true. And the reality is you may be running into one of those, because those certainly exist, but you also may be running into somebody who just has financial education that's going to sound very different than what you've probably heard your entire life. And when you start hearing people talk about money, a lot of people get scared, and because most of us were taught our whole life not to talk about money. So I think the real long-winded answer to that is start looking. Open your eyes and say, I'm looking for a financial education. I'm open to getting a financial education. I acknowledge that I have a formal education, but not a financial education, and just start seeking out information that, is coming from somebody who has created a different type of financial, look for their family than maybe the one that you've had.
Absolutely. And a couple of really great books to get started. You have, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Is there another book you would recommend?
Yeah, I think Rich Dad, Poor Dad is probably the most, I don't know, famous is the right word, but the most notorious for getting most people to realize that you can have two different types of education, right? In the book, there's a rich dad that has a financial education, and there's what he calls a poor dad that has a formal education. The reality is the poor dad was probably better off than most people in America, right? He was a university professor, right? So it's not that it was necessarily poor. It's just once you realize what a financial education creates, relatively speaking, he was poor. It was more of what the mindset that the two were comparing. And so, I think that's a great place to start for sure, is picking up that book. And I think it'll open your eyes to the reality that, hey, there's a difference in financial education and a formal education. And also to point out that there's nothing wrong with the formal education. That's what majority of people have. It's okay. And we're very fortunate here in America. We all live a really good life with just a formal education, and that's okay. But I feel like most people that are listening to this right now are at a point in their life where they're like, okay, I've went through this life with the formal education. I'm ready to step up and get a financial education. And that's a great place to be as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So how can real estate investors, that's who's listening, or at least future real estate investors, how can they structure their businesses or just their lives in general, to have that seamless transition to that next generation, with their finances, or
Yeah,
even with the financial
for those,
education.
yeah, so for those that don't have the finances just yet, it's go out and start getting that financial education, right? That's the first step. Obviously, if you're listening to this right now and you're a woman, I think the best place to go do that is the Women's Real Estate Investors Network, right? And I don't just say that because I'm a founder and I'm your son and I'm a part of it, but I say that because we have spent insane amount of money, over multi six figures, over seven figures on financial education. That's exactly what we do, is we turn around and share that back with others. And so I think that's the best place to start, whether it's through us or through another form, going out there and getting that financial education. For those that have already done that and created some form of assets, then I think it really starts with setting up an estate plan, right? Going and getting an estate plan set up where you get a will, a trust, a true, estate plan, and start actually being cognizant of what it is that your plan is whenever you do pass away, right? We're all going to pass away. They say there's two things in life guaranteed: one's you'll pay taxes, and two, you'll die. And so the reality
So
is
true.
we're all gonna reach that point. And so starting to get a financial plan in place is a great way to go. Estate plan, I'm sorry.
Okay. So, Kelton, let's just say I have some assets. I have a business or two. I've got an IRA. I have some life insurance. I've got a couple of properties and stuff. I've got what happens? What does my family go through? Or I guess what would be the difference if I left my all of my stuff in a will to my family, versus if I left it in a trust? What is the difference in that when I pass away and the processes that take place? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So obviously there's going to be some dependent on how much assets we're talking about, right? Depends on what type of journey that's going to look like. If somebody was, left a car between three siblings, that's going to look wildly different than what you just explained. Somebody who was left, some more valuable assets, that's going to go through a probate process, which is, first off, it goes back to when somebody passes away, they've got to now go and hire an attorney and go through probate. And usually most people don't know what any of this means until they lose a loved one. That's usually when most people even learn what probate is. Most people have never hired an attorney in their life. And so the odds that they even get every step of that correct up until that point, usually they end up losing money and time just trying to figure out, like, where do I start? Where do I go? They're usually Googling it, and that leads you down a rabbit hole. But assuming they get through all those rabbit holes, then it goes to a probate, which goes through a probate attorney. It's a very lengthy, time-consuming process, costs money, and it usually just isn't the most efficient. It is the least efficient or effective way to split up those different types of assets. As I mentioned earlier, most often a probate attorney is going to force a property to be sold, and that's usually not what's best. Like in real estate, we believe in buy, borrow, die, right? We never sell real estate. We want to buy it, we want to hold on to it, borrow against it, tax free, and then pass away and leave it on. And then, ironically, when an attorney gets a hold of it, the first thing a probate attorney is going to do is say, liquidate everything, right? Well, most of us would agree the best way the best thing to do with our assets is usually not to just go liquidate everything, right? Sell it, even at a discount if you have to, sell it as fast as possible so you can start divvying it up, as opposed to a trust, which can be very clearly articulated. First off, you oftentimes don't have to go through a probate if it's left in a trust. And so you're saving them that headache, the logistics of learning that whole process, hoping they get it right, all of those things. And then more importantly, it's going to outline what you get to choose while you're alive. What is the best thing to happen once you pass away with those properties? For instance, you can actually put it in the trust that the property is not allowed to be sold, and that the cash flow from the properties is divided between, say, the three heirs in the example I keep using. So I think that's the biggest difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Totally. Thank you. Yes.
Good.
So good.
So good. So good. We talk a lot about legacy, leaving a legacy. And of course, we're talking about that in so many different ways because we want to leave a legacy of money, of finances, instead of just leaving our kids a burden. But you hope to have some assets to pass down. Obviously, there's also just legacy of value, of maybe your spiritual beliefs and all that. How can you just speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I think um, to me that would be the first thing that we want to leave behind, right? And the reality is the biggest impact you're going to make on that is going to happen while you're still alive, right? That's where the biggest impact's going to come, and that's living by example on everything that you do. We talk a lot about that when it comes to finances and financial plans, and all of that is living by example. But I think it's the same thing when it comes to spiritual and ethical things that you're trying to leave behind, is leading by example. First and foremost, building the connection, the relationship, just focusing on what's most important in life. I think that's the best advice I could give people. Is a lot of people focus on things that aren't the most important things in life. We get very busy running around, chasing a corporate ladder or keeping up with the Joneses or doing whatever it is, and fail to realize that it's that quality time with family and devotion that's far more important than another paycheck or creating a little more assets. So I think it starts there, and then to kind of transition past that and beyond that. I think a lot of that goes back to how and what you leave behind, right? If you were living by example and leading by example, then you would have more to leave behind. You would leave that behind in a trust, and then how you leave that behind can be greatly impacted. So I use what I call a legacy box, and in that legacy box is everything that's being left behind. And obviously, the first thing when you open that legacy box that you're going to see is a Bible and a letter sharing how important that Bible is to me, and that's more important than all the other things in the box, right? Because the reality is, if a kid gets a box full of a bunch of assets, that's probably in their mind, if there's a Bible in it, they may forget about it. But I think an actual letter of me sharing with them that this is the most important thing. And so just being very intentional about how we leave these things behind. And again, going back to a trust, it allows you to do it in a very organized way. So sharing the importance of philanthropy and not just leaving every asset you have behind, but actually putting some of those towards a philosophical cause that you believe in is a great example. And again, everything's about leading by example. And so the more assets you start to create, the more philanthropy you're able to do. But you also want to do that as as you leave. You don't just want to leave everything to your children, but if you can actually leave some foundations, some charities, it's a great way for us to hope that our next generation actually realizes that, wow, they did more than just lived and died. They were making an impact.
Absolutely.
And I want to make an impact. And how do I make an impact? And then that's where the trust comes in and shows them that not only can you make an impact, but we're going to keep making an impact either way.
Yeah.
However, you can be involved in this. If you'd like to get involved in the foundation, there's an opportunity for you to do that. And all that's built into a trust.
I love it. I love it. I want to say, one more thing is I hear you talking about your son who is 3 right now. And obviously I raised you. I didn't have a financial education. I had that formal education. And so I only could teach you what I knew. And but now that you have this financial education, I hear you talking about how you're going to do things differently with him, even with, giving him money and how what you're going to require. And man, that is so exciting to me to watch you doing that. And so that he will never be in that same situation. And then he can leave this financial education as well as assets, as well as that heart for philanthropy and then that just is what changes the generation after generation after generation.
For sure. And I think the first thing that we teach whenever we talk about financial education is that money is a tool. And I think the reality is, here in America, we've been brainwashed that money defines us. And, we use terms like, oh, that person's successful. And what we actually mean is they're financially successful, right? And so most of us have been raised in a way that we believe money has a power over us and it defines who we are. And so the first thing you have to do is rip that belief and throw that in the trash can and realize that money's a tool, and it's only good if you use that tool. And so one of the first things that I will teach my children is exactly that, right? No one's allowed to save money, right? We won't have piggy banks where they just take this money and stick it away and hide it and think that they're better off because they saved this concept of money that's losing value every single day. And so I think starting with the foundation of just acknowledging that and understanding that is the first principle that I want them to learn. But also, this idea of creating value. I think a lot of people pay their kids to do chores, and it's like, I believe that's a horrible, horrible concept, because the chores are going to get done one way or the other. They're not creating value to the environment. And so if my kids are going to get paid for something, it's going to be, them learning at an early age that if you're actually able to go out there and create value and provide value to the marketplace, and even if it is something as silly as a lemonade stand, like they start to realize that if I do a service to somebody, I can create revenue in return, and then very quickly, start educating them on what to do with that money when they get it. I think our whole life we were taught to save it. Somehow we were better if we saved it, and the more of it we made us better, instead of realizing that no, the only way that money is going to do any good is if you first have to take the money and then go do some good with the money. You got to go use the money to do something that's going to do good for somebody. And if you can start to teach people that at a young age, it actually changes the way you think about money, and you want money, but not for your own good. You want money so you can do good things with it. A side effect of that is you get to have a good life as well. But it's that distinct differentiation between understanding that money is a tool. It's designed to be used, versus most of us are taught to just hold it, grasp it, save it, and as if somehow that's going to make us a better person. The reality is it actually tends to do the opposite.
Yeah. One phrase that you say all the time is if you don't use your money, you lose your money. So we're not about saving our money, but investing it and leveraging it.
Absolutely. And I think some people hear this and they're like, oh my gosh, they said don't save your money. And it's like, it's ironic, right? Because the people that are saving the money are the ones that tend to have none. The people that use their money are the ones that tend to have the most amount saved up.
Because we're certainly not saying go spend all of your money on, silliness. We're saying use your money for good and reinvesting that money or giving it, to good causes. Those are things that's going to cause your money to grow.
Exactly. And then it starts to multiply. And so it's the person who's saying they don't save their money that has this money multiplying in assets in all these places, as opposed to the person who's like, that's crazy, I save all my money, that doesn't have much money saved up. Right. And so it's a different way of thought for sure. But yeah, and the idea behind using your money or losing your money is most people don't realize inflation is real. I mean, even our own government acknowledges inflation is growing at least 3 or 4%, when the reality is for the last half decade, it's been 3 times that. It's usually twice as high as they acknowledge, but people don't understand that concept. They're printing more of it every single day. And so if you go make a bunch of money and you save it, every day that goes by, they're printing more of it, devaluing yours, and you're losing the money that you're holding on to when you could have been using it and benefiting from all of that inflation and everything taking place.
So good.
Ooh, such a wealth of information. I feel like we've just kind of barely scratched the surface of this very important topic of the legacies that we want to leave and how we're going to do it, the wills and the trusts. So I'm hoping that at some point you'll come back and we can dive a little bit deeper. But for now, if there's one final piece of advice that you would like those listening to hear, what would it be?
Yeah, so I guess I'll back up real quick right before that and say, we put a lot of focus on wills and trust, and those are 2 very key pieces of the puzzle. I think if I would say there's a third piece of the puzzle that's equally as important, is some form of life insurance. I'm a huge believer in whole life insurance, but even if it's term life insurance, right? It's some kind of security on us. However, I think if I can bring a little bit of excitement to this topic, right? This usually isn't the most exciting topic to talk about, estates and wills and dying and death and life insurance and all of these things. However, I personally believe that the benefit from doing all of these things correctly should all be massive living benefits. And I think that's an issue that most people have with this topic, is they procrastinate and put it off because they think of it as this death benefit, right? Well, when I'm dead, other people are going to benefit. And yeah, even though it's people they love, subconsciously, it's not moving to the top of your priority list. Because most people feel that these are all things that are going to benefit them whenever they pass away, especially life insurance. And I'm a huge advocate to help people realize that the reason we do all these things are first and foremost for the living benefits. There's just some really cool death benefits that come along for the ride. And so I like to get people to shift their focus on the reason you want to have trusts in place and creative financial structures in place, like properly funded whole life policies, not your normal whole life policies, but overfunded, max funded whole life policies, and as well as the trust and everything else we're talking about, is for the living benefits. They actually allow you to use your money more freely. Most people lock their money away in a piggy bank when they're young, and then they get a formal job and they don't realize they're just trading a piggy bank that you have to break to get into for a 401k that is just a grown-up's piggy bank. It's the same concept. You have to break it to get into it. It locks your money away, and it's the opposite of using your money. Not only do you have to pay the taxes, but you even have to pay a penalty if you go access that money. Though that, in my opinion, is the worst motivation to save money. I like to encourage people to save money in a way that they're actually going to be able to use their money, which is exactly what a properly funded whole life policy does. Is it allows you to actually access your money when a good investment opportunity comes up. It allows you to grow your money tax-free. So if you have a properly structured and funded whole life policy, then you actually are able to use that money while you're alive. You're able to access the money if a good investment opportunity comes up, or when a good investment opportunity comes up. And the reality is a properly structured, overfunded whole life policy allows you to have a better living benefits than, say, something like an IRA or 401k that penalizes you for using your money. Instead, when set up correctly and used correctly, you can actually get benefits for accessing your money and using your money. But more importantly, you have access to use that money. And then, of course, there's this huge added bonus of a death benefit. But I think so many people focus or think about things like estate plans or trusts or life insurance as things that only benefit them whenever they pass away. But the reality is we are huge proponents of using them so that you can show up more powerfully every single day, because you're confident that those things are taken care of and all your affairs are in line, but also in a way that allows you to be able to access your money, use your money, and create more value to the marketplace, which rewards you as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so if somebody, for our listeners that are listening today and they're taking all of this in and they're like, okay, I know I need all of this. Where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say find a mentor, find a mentor that you can feel confident that you're getting a good financial education from somebody who's already done exactly what it is that you're trying to do, and start opening up your eyes to the reality is that, if you're like 90% of Americans or more, you just have a formal education. It's time to get a financial education and start going down that process and that road of reading the books and opening your mind and your eyes to the concept of using your money, not just saving your money, and learning about financial education, not just relying on a formal education that was intended to have you get a job and get kind of stuck in this rat race that we've most people find themselves in here in America.
Kelton, this is so good.
It is. It's so good. And I know that our listeners need to hear this. It's such important information.
Yeah. So thank you for being with us. I can't wait to hear our listeners' feedback. And we would love to see your feedback right here in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Listeners, if you're aiming for financial freedom, dreaming of designing a life you absolutely love, or just curious about how real estate can transform your future, you're in the right place.
Yes, ladies, if that sounds like what you want, our masterclass is the key. It's easy to understand, super straightforward, and packed with all the secrets you need to start investing in real estate confidently and successfully. Why wait to build your dream future? Join us and let us make your dreams a stunning reality.
Just click the masterclass link in the notes below.
And we can't wait to begin this journey with you.